Hi everybody, this is August 15, 2024, and this is my video journal to recover from the trauma of watching the British Columbia government kill my younger brother, Paul Kierans. So I'm almost 69 and Paul was 65. And we grew up together. I taught him to print the only word that he knew how to print or read, and that was his first name, Paul. It took me about a year of working hours every day to teach him that, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of that I've accomplished in my life. So I spent my childhood defending Paul and protecting him from neighborhood kids and people who didn't understand or had prejudice against Down syndrome. At the time that Paul was growing up, there was no education. The government offered nothing at all for intellectually disabled children like Paul who had Down syndrome. And when he was born, the doctors recommended that my parents place him or incarcerate him in a large institution for handicapped children called Smith Falls in Ontario. And the life expectancy was much briefer than for children who were raised in a home, because we now understand the concept of attachment on children and the importance of attachment for children to survive. So my father brought Paul home on the train. He took the train home from Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto to Sudbury, where we lived. And I think my mother was ambivalent about caring for him. She had never heard of or seen a child with Down syndrome before. And I think he was the 9th of 9 children. I was the 8th of 8 children. But she sort of decided to, I guess, tackle that project like anything else. And she turned one of our biggest bedrooms into a daycare for disabled children. There was another little boy named Danny Smith who lived around the corner who had Down syndrome. And so she just filled up a room with educational toys and art supplies, and she just ran her own daycare. So, we really never asked the government for very much. And then when Paul was a teen, he went into a group home in Quebec. But he spent weekends with my mother, and he lived with my mother basically on weekends until she died in 2004. And then my sisters and I cared for him on weekends for from 2004 onwards. I did for 10 years. And I found out in January of 2022 that Paul's group home, L'Arche, my mother had brought Paul out to Greater Vancouver to be close to me and my other family members, and moved him into a L'Arche group home because we thought it was a Catholic group home, which we now know it wasn't. L'Arche, L'Arche. Please Google it when you get a chance. And Google the founder. The founder's name was Jean Vanier. He was a retired Canadian naval officer, and his sidekick, a defrocked, excommunicated Catholic priest named Thomas Philippe. They had started an sex cult named L'Arche, and their scheme or their scam was to create group homes for the most profoundly incapable adults, staff them with young women from around the world that were passing through the country. And then they preyed on the young women as a form of, they said it was a form of religious. Jean Vanier preyed on at least 28 women, but we didn't find out until 2019. And L'Arche was never investigated by the police. It was allowed to investigate itself. But governments around the world flocked to place their disabled, incapable adults in L'Arche institutions or L'Arche group homes because it had kind of an aura of sanctity when really it was just a cult. So in January of 2022, I discovered that L'Arche had created a secret power of attorney over Paul with no lawyer's advice, no lawyer witness. They had two of their low-level group home workers witness my brother's signature, which was a forgery. And then they perjured themselves about the forgery. I know it's a forgery because it took me a year to teach Paul to print his name. So, and they L'Arche named my 81-year-old nun, Catholic nun sister from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Sault Ste. Marie, 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who has never lived with Paul and who does not understand his speech, as his guardian. And they did that because they wanted to have control over him and they wanted to do an end run. I have another sister who has cared for Paul, who moved to Vancouver Island, and she was an anti-COVID-19 vaxxer. So they wanted to give him the vaccine without telling the sister on Vancouver Island. So they named the nun 4,000 kilometers away, who's a very wealthy. She has access to vast amounts of wealth as a result of donations from the government to this. And the sister has the habit, pardon the pun, of flying in. If somebody in my family is dying, she fancies herself an angel of death, so she flies in and takes over. And whereas other family members may have cared for that person for long periods of time, she flies in at the last moment and takes over. And she's a very bad person, a very evil person. But anyways, so when I objected to this fraudulent and forged power of attorney, and I brought a court application to have it set aside, L'Arche terminated my visits with my brother. So that was on September 12th of 2022, 588 days before he died on April 23rd of 2024. And I did everything in my power. I worked full-time all day, every day, trying to restore our visits. I'm a retired lawyer. I was in an accident and suffered a brain injury in 2008, and I retired completely from practicing law in 2014. And I just focused. I thought, how hard could this be? An 81-year-old nun that has never lived with my brother, 4,000 kilometers away. The law in BC until my case was that there has been an outside resident of BC, has never been appointed a guardian of an incapable person in BC. So I thought, how hard could it be? My sister spent, I estimate, about $350,000. She hired two law firms, one in Ottawa, one in Vancouver. And you'd think, well, God, that's a lot of money. She must have been really cared about your brother. No, she did. It's all a tax write-off for her because it's a tax-exempt institution. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Sault Ste. Marie can spend all the money they want on lawyers and write it all off as a tax deduction. So I was allowed a 10-minute visit, telephone visit once a week with my brother. And I last spoke with him on April 12th of 2024. And he said, "Kathleen, take me to a movie." He missed me so much, and I missed him so much. It was torture. It felt like torture. I've never tried so hard to do anything in my life as to restore our visits. He's my last living relative from our big family in the lower mainland of British Columbia, and I was his only visitor. And I thought, this can't be happening. The government, during the week I would go to the government office. This is the BC New Democratic Party government office. It's called Community Living BC. I'd go there every single day, every single business day, and drop off a letter asking for a meeting to complain about the isolation and confinement of my brother against his will. And the government never met with me once. And they allowed one-hour visit in 588 days. That was for Christmas of 2023. They're truly evil people. Truly evil people. I practiced law for 16 years. I couldn't believe it myself. And then I got an email on April 15th saying that my brother had had a stroke, and I could arrange a visit through my sister's lawyer, who's a corrupt shyster, just an absolute, a liar, a corrupt liar. But anyway, so he said I could arrange a visit through him. I dropped everything and I took a cab to Burnaby Hospital. And I was allowed a 10-minute visit. So I spent 10 hours a day, every day, for the 10 days that Paul was there. And the point of these videos, as I'm just trying to convey, and I'm not doing a very good job of it, I'm afraid, but the total helplessness that I felt. Paul was trying to recover. I was watching him. At first, he seemed comatose, but he squeezed my hand. When I first saw him, I said, "Paul, it's Kathleen." And that was the first time I had seen him in 588 days face to face. And he squeezed my hand and he wouldn't let go until I was told to leave. And then I watched him slowly recover. And I posted about it here on Facebook that I brought him a book that a neighbor gave me of Hollywood movie stars, a great big coffee table book, a big heavy book. And as soon as he saw it, he grabbed it out of my hand. On my second visit, he grabbed the book out of my hand and started turning the pages perfectly and scanning the pictures perfectly. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so thrilled. Then I got a phone call on April 21st from the government. And I was told that Ottawa had ordered an investigation of the fraudulent and forged representation agreement. And that I was interviewed for about 25 minutes. And I thought, oh, this is a breakthrough. Somebody's going to start listening to me now. And I went to court the next day, and I tried to convince the judge to appoint the Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction that pays Paul's bills. My sister's never contributed a dime to anyone in her life. And it's the BC taxpayer that was paying his bills, $25,000 a month to L'Arche for Paul's care, to be locked up, isolated, and confined for 588 days. But I didn't have time before the judge to explain that the government was investigating the fraudulent and forged representation agreement. When I got back from court that day, on April 22nd, Paul looked dead. He was in a room by himself. The ventilator had been removed. He had been on a ventilator. The catheter was removed. He had no food, no water. He was alone in a room with no other patients. And what I could see before my very eyes, that my sister had ordered the doctor to sedate my brother to death. To admit, Paul was struggling to recover. I could see that look in that little glimmer in his eyes, that he was struggling to recover, and maybe he wouldn't have, but he was struggling. But my sister ordered the doctor to sedate my brother to death. I could see that. He couldn't fight the sedation that they had given him. He had taken, as soon as she learned that the government was investigating the fraudulent and forged representation agreement, my brother had to die, and he had to die fast, because she didn't want the police or anyone to be able to get a sample of Paul's signature or to interview him. So the main point that I'm trying to convey in these videos is the helplessness that I felt my whole life. I've worked so hard for the justice system and for the underdog. My secretaries used to complain, why don't you ever work for the overdog? You always work for the underdog. And I'd been successful. But in the person who I most wanted to protect, my little brother Paul Kierans, I could not protect in the end. And I watched him being murdered in front of my own eyes by Burnaby Hospital. And I've complained to the coroner, I've complained to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, I've complained to every government body, but they don't care. So anyways, that's my video for today. The point I want to get across is that I'm a real person, and my brother was a real person, and we had the right to be left alone. My parents never asked for much for Paul, just to be left alone. But they killed him. As far as I know, there's still an investigation that's ongoing, and I'll let you know what happens. Take care, everybody. Paul, I miss you so much. I just don't have the heart to throw away all your clothes and toys and puzzles and games. I just don't have the heart to do it. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.